In February 1637, a man in Haarlem traded his Amsterdam townhouse, 4 stories, canal view, servants' quarters included, for 3 tulip bulbs. 1 week later, those bulbs were worth less than a sack of onions. He hanged himself in March. Welcome to Tulip Mania, history's first financial bubble where flowers became more valuable than human life, and an entire nation convinced itself that the laws of mathematics had been suspended by God himself. The Dutch called it windhandel, trading in the wind. We call it Tuesday. Because here's the thing about 2026, we haven't learned a damn thing. We just changed the flowers. Let's rewind to 1630s Holland. The Dutch Republic is the wealthiest place on earth. They've just invented the modern corporation, conquered the spice trade, and are currently shipping more goods than Spain, Portugal, and England combined. Amsterdam's harbor is so crowded with merchant ships that you can walk from one side to the other without getting your feet wet. But here's the problem with being absurdly wealthy. You run out of things to buy. The Dutch burghers already have the houses, the paintings, the silver. They've imported so much gold from the New World that it's piled up in warehouses like firewood. Their economy is drowning in money with nowhere to go. Then someone discovers that tulips, brought from Turkey a few decades earlier, can mutate. A virus causes the petals to break into these wild, flaming patterns, striped, feathered, colors that don't exist in nature. And suddenly, every merchant who's bored with his 4th Rembrandt has found something new to obsess over. The metaphor writes itself. Take a basic vegetable bulb, add scarcity, wrap it in beauty, and watch rational people lose their minds. Here's where the story gets interesting. Because Tulip Mania doesn't have a villain. No single con artist. No mastermind pulling strings. That's what makes it terrifying. The closest thing to an architect is a guy named Adrian Paul, a tulip breeder who understands that scarcity plus desire equals profit. But Paul isn't creating a scheme. He's just a gardener who got lucky. The real villain is the structure itself, the futures market. See, tulips only bloom for a week in spring, but people want to trade them year-round. So the Dutch invent something brilliant and stupid. They start selling promises of tulips, paper contracts for bulbs still in the ground. You buy a contract in November for a Semper Augustus bulb that won't exist until April. Then you sell that contract to someone else in January. Then they sell it in February. The tulip itself never moves. It's still buried in dirt. The flower becomes irrelevant. The paper becomes everything. Sound familiar? In 2026, we call these derivatives. In 1636, they called them windhandel, trading wind. Same mechanism, different props. The math is identical. You're not buying the thing. You're buying the idea of the thing, and you're betting someone stupider than you will pay more for that idea tomorrow. The Dutch didn't know they were inventing financial derivatives. They thought they were selling flowers. Here's how the trap actually worked, step by step. Stage 1. You're a tulip grower. You plant 100 bulbs. In a good year, each bulb produces 1 flower and 2 to 3 new bulbs. You now have 200 to 300 bulbs to sell next year. Supply is growing. This should make prices fall. It doesn't. Stage 2. In June, I approach you. I don't want your tulips now. They're not even in the ground yet. I want a contract promising you'll sell me 10 Semper Augustus bulbs next spring. You agree. We shake hands. I pay you 500 guilders as a deposit. You give me a piece of paper. Stage 3. The chain. I take that paper to the tavern. I find someone who thinks tulip prices will keep rising. I sell him my contract for 600 guilders. I just made 100 guilders profit on flowers that don't exist yet. He takes the paper, finds someone else, sells it for 700 guilders. That person sells it for 900, then down 200. Then 2,000. By February 1637, that contract for 10 bulbs is worth 6,000 guilders, enough to buy a decent house. The actual tulips are still buried in your garden, doing nothing. But the paper has been sold 15 times. 15 people think they own those bulbs. Stage 4. The math problem. Here's where it breaks. In April, the tulips bloom. There are 10 actual physical bulbs. But there are 15 contracts claiming ownership. Someone has to lose. Actually, 14 someones have to lose because only one contract is legally valid. The original one you signed. The entire market is built on a stack of paper promises that cannot possibly all be honored simultaneously. It's a game of musical chairs, where there's one chair and 5,000 players. But nobody realizes this yet, because everyone is still trading paper and the music is still playing. January 1637, the insanity reaches full bloom, pun intended. A single Semper Augustus bulb sells for 6,000 guilders. For context, that's 10 years' wages for a skilled craftsman. The same price as Amsterdam's fanciest canal house, with furniture included. One flower costs more than a literal building. People are selling everything. A merchant in Hoorn trades his brewery, a functioning business generating income, for 3 bulbs. A sailor trades his ship. Farmers are mortgaging their land, not to buy seed or livestock, but to buy tulip contracts, paper promises of flowers they've never seen. The taverns of Amsterdam become stock exchanges. Every inn has a tulip room where traders gather. They've invented hand signals like modern floor traders. They're drinking Jennifer and screaming bids for bulbs that won't exist for 3 months. Blacksmiths are becoming millionaires. Fishermen are retiring to estates. Some genius calculated that you could feed a family for a decade with the food equivalent of 1 flower. But nobody's thinking about food. They're thinking about the next trade. The Dutch have convinced themselves they've discovered a perpetual motion machine. Prices only go up. The contracts are magic paper that prints money. The bulbs are buried treasure that multiplies underground. Everyone is rich, at least on paper. February the 3rd, 1637, Tuesday, Haarlem. A routine tulip auction. Standard procedure. Auctioneer holds up a contract, takes bids, sells to the highest offer. Except today, nobody bids. The auctioneer tries again. Silence. He lowers the price. More silence. Someone asks a question nobody has asked in months. But what is the bulb actually worth? The music stops. Within 24 hours, the news spreads to Amsterdam, then Rotterdam, then The Hague. By Saturday, tulip contracts are selling for 10% of their previous value. By the following Tuesday, 1%. People who were millionaires on Monday are bankrupt by Friday. The paper promises are still paper, but now they're worthless paper. Here's the mechanism of the collapse. Remember those contracts. They required payment on delivery in April. But if the contract price is 5,000 guilders and the actual bulb is now worth 50 guilders, nobody is paying 5,000 guilders. They'll just break the contract and pay the penalty, which is cheaper. Suddenly, everyone realizes simultaneously that they're holding worthless paper. The bulbs are still in the ground. They're still beautiful. They'll still bloom in spring. But the story is dead, and the story was the only thing with value. The silence after Tulip Mania is deafening. No bank collapse, no government bailout, just thousands of individuals quietly realizing they've destroyed their lives for flowers. The suicides don't make the newspapers because there are too many to count. Families lose generational wealth. Fortunes vanish like morning frost. The Dutch government tries to intervene, declares the contracts null, offers mediation. It doesn't matter. The money is gone. It was never really there. It was always just a shared hallucination, a collective agreement to pretend that paper promises were worth more than houses. The tulips bloom in April, same as always. They're still beautiful, nobody cares. Now let's look at 2026 with clear eyes. The US national debt just crossed $38 trillion. We're adding roughly $2 trillion per year, about $5 billion per day, in a stable economy. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet is still sitting above $7 trillion, having printed more money in 2020 to 2021 than existed in the entire economy in 1980. We've convinced ourselves this is sustainable. In 2021, a JPEG of a cartoon ape sold for $3.4 million, not the copyright, not the original artwork. A receipt saying you owned the digital file. By 2023, that same NFT was worth $40,000. By 2025, you couldn't give it away. Same mechanism, paper promises, well, blockchain promises, for things with no intrinsic value, traded by people who genuinely believed they'd found a perpetual motion machine. Or look at venture capital. In 2021, companies with zero revenue were receiving $100 million valuations because they had the word AI in their pitch deck. Investors were trading promises of future promises of potential profits. By 2024, hundreds of these startups collapsed. The money vanished. It had never been real, just a shared hallucination that growth equals value, regardless of whether anything is actually being built. The student loan bubble, $1.7 trillion in outstanding debt, growing faster than inflation for degrees that often don't increase earning potential. We've convinced 18-year-olds to mortgage their futures for paper credentials, promising them the paper will be valuable. The math doesn't work, never has, but we keep writing the contracts. Or cryptocurrency, it's pure windhandel. Trading promises of digital scarcity with no intrinsic use value, held together entirely by the belief that someone else will pay more tomorrow. When the music stops, and it always stops, billions evaporate. Here's what the Dutch learned in 1637, and what we keep forgetting. You cannot have infinite growth in a finite system. At some point, the number of contracts exceeds the number of actual things. At some point, the math stops working. At some point, someone asks the obvious question, but what is this actually worth? And when that question gets asked, the answer is usually less than you thought. Sometimes nothing at all. The difference between 1637 and 2026? In 1637, when the tulip market collapsed, it didn't take down the entire economy. The Dutch bounced back. They still had their ships, their trade routes, their infrastructure. In 2026, we've built our entire financial system on windhandel. The derivatives market is worth over $1 quadrillion, roughly 12 times global GDP. We're not trading flowers. We're trading promises of promises of promises of things that might exist, backed by institutions that are themselves leveraged 30-to-1 on assets we're not allowed to audit. When this bubble pops, not if, when, it won't be tulips that become worthless. It'll be the paper we call money itself. Here's the lesson Tulip Mania teaches us. Humans don't learn from history because humans don't think they're repeating history. The Dutch didn't think they were idiots. They thought they were different. They'd discovered something new. A flower so rare, so beautiful, so desirable that normal economic rules didn't apply. We think the same thing. Every generation does. We think our bubble is different because it's backed by technology or government promises or blockchain. We think we're smarter than the Dutch burghers who traded houses for flowers. We're not. The mechanism is always the same. Create paper promises, convince people the paper is valuable, trade the paper faster and faster until nobody remembers what the paper represents, then watch it collapse when someone asks the obvious question. The Dutch figured this out in 1637. We're still learning it in 2026, one bubble at a time, one fortune at a time, one suicide at a time. The flowers were always just flowers. The paper was always just paper. And the real tulip, the one that costs more than a house, is the lie we keep telling ourselves. This time is different. It never is. If you want to watch history repeat itself in real time, subscribe to Papermint. We'll be here, eyebrow raised, taking notes while the world burns. Again.